Did I hear wrong? Or did that sound like you begging me to come back? Modern Queen Tales presents Tech, Romance, and Payback. How Bug Took a Whole New Meaning. The termination letter sat in the center of my aluminum desk, printed on the university's heavy stock linen paper. Charlie's signature slashed across the bottom in arrogant blue ink. The words dictated the immediate cessation of my funding and the termination of my faculty position. I stared at the document, listening to the rhythmic hum of the climate-controlled terrariums lining the walls of my laboratory. Inside those glass enclosures, thousands of Apis mellifera honeybees and Drosophila melanogaster fruit flies went about their intricate, hardwired routines, entirely oblivious to the bureaucratic execution of my career. The frosted glass door of my lab swung open. Charlie walked in, adjusting the lapels of his custom-tailored charcoal suit. My ex-husband held the position of Dean of Biological Sciences, a title he wielded with the precision of a scalpel. He paused by the central workstation, running a manicured finger over the pristine stainless steel. "You received the notice, Monica," Charlie said. He offered a tight, patronizing smile. "This is a necessary reallocation of departmental resources. Your mapping of the insect neural pathways is a dead end. The board requires research with immediate pharmaceutical applications. Counting the synapses of a fruit fly offers zero return on investment." I picked up the termination letter and folded it neatly in half. I have mapped the complete connectome of the honeybee mushroom body. I have isolated the exact synaptic pathways that govern spatial memory and swarm logic. The applications for behavioral science are unprecedented. "The applications are non-existent," Charlie corrected, his tone flat and final. "You are obsessed with bugs. You have always been obsessed with bugs. The university needs forward-thinking innovation. You have until 5 o'clock to clear your personal effects. The raw data and the laboratory equipment remain university property." I looked at the man I had married in my 20s. He possessed the same sharp jawline and the same calculating eyes, but the ambition that had once seemed charming now revealed itself as pure ruthlessness. Our divorce a year ago had been a quiet, sterile affair, much like this firing. He had systematically removed me from his personal life, and now he was excising me from my professional domain. "I will take my personal hard drives," I said, my voice steady. "The terms of my original grant stipulate that the neural mapping data belongs to the primary researcher. I paid for the servers out of my own pocket." Charlie checked his silver wristwatch. "Take your drives. They are useless without the university's processing power to run the simulations. Have a good life, Monica." He turned and walked out, the heavy glass door sealing shut behind him with a soft hiss. I immediately pulled a stack of cardboard boxes from the supply closet. I moved methodically, wrapping my framed diplomas, my specialized entomology tools, and my favorite coffee mug in bubble wrap. I approached the server rack in the corner of the room. The blinking green lights represented 10 years of my life. 10 years of slicing insect brains into microscopic sections, scanning them with electron microscopes, and building 3-dimensional digital models of their neural networks. I unlatched the heavy casing and pulled out the primary solid-state drives, sliding them into a padded anti-static briefcase. By 4 o'clock, I stood in the faculty parking lot. The afternoon sun beat down on the asphalt. I loaded the last box into the trunk of my 10-year-old sedan, slammed the lid shut, and sat behind the steering wheel. I placed my hands on the worn leather, the silence of the car pressing in on me. The padded briefcase rested on the passenger seat, holding terabytes of insect neural maps. Charlie believed the data was useless. He believed my obsession with the microscopic logic of insects was a quirky flaw that he had finally managed to eradicate from his pristine department. A memory surfaced, sharp and vibrant, cutting through the sterile reality of the parking lot. 7 years ago, a sticky vinyl booth in a late-night diner near the edge of the campus. I sat across from Joseph Cage. Joseph wore a faded band t-shirt, his messy dark hair falling over his eyes, his fingers constantly moving. He was a mechanical engineering and computer science double major who rarely attended class. He preferred to dismantle the university's mainframes in his dorm room. Joseph held up a single sugar packet, rotating it between his thumb and forefinger. "You're looking at this the wrong way, Buggy," Joseph had said, using the nickname only he could get away with. "You look at an ant, and you see biology. You see cells and chitin. I look at an ant, and I see a perfect, hyper-efficient circuit board." I had laughed, sipping my terrible diner coffee. "An ant has barely 250,000 neurons, Joe. A human has 86 billion. It's a biological machine, sure, but a very primitive one." "That is exactly the point." Joseph had leaned across the table, his dark eyes burning with that familiar, manic energy. He tapped the sugar packet on the Formica surface. Nature spent millions of years optimizing that tiny brain. Those synapses are complex enough to store incredibly sophisticated animal instincts, foraging, building, defending, communicating. But they are simple enough that we could map them. We could replicate them. He tore open the sugar packet and poured a small, neat pile of crystals onto the table. He dragged his finger through the sugar, drawing lines connecting distinct clusters. "Current computer programming relies on brute force," Joseph explained, tracing a complex web. "We build massive, energy-hungry processors to calculate every possible outcome. But an insect has no need to calculate. It reacts. It follows a hardwired path of logic gates. If you map the exact synaptic structure of an insect's instinct, say, a bee's navigational instinct, and translate that biological map into binary code, you create a new kind of software. You create software that doesn't compute. It simply knows." At the time, I had dismissed it as a brilliant, drug-addled late-night theory. Joseph dropped out of college 2 months later to build custom drones in a rented garage, chasing the chaotic pull of entrepreneurship. We had lost touch over the years, the academic track pulling me in one direction, the chaotic startup world pulling him in another. I looked at the padded briefcase on my passenger seat. Inside those drives sat the perfect, complete maps of the exact synapses Joseph had theorized about. I pulled my phone from my pocket and opened my contacts. I scrolled past department heads and academic peers until I found the name, Joseph Cage. I tapped the number. It rang 3 times. "Cage," a voice answered. It sounded deeper, a little rougher around the edges, accompanied by the high-pitched whine of a power tool in the background. "Joseph, it's Monica Carpenter. Buggy." The power tool cut off instantly. A heavy silence stretched over the cellular connection. "Buggy," Joseph said, his voice warming instantly. "I was just thinking about the biomechanics of a grasshopper's knee joint. Where are you?" "I have my entire mapped connectome of the Apis mellifera on a solid-state drive sitting in my car," I said, speaking quickly. Every neuron, every synapse, every hardwired instinctual pathway, Charlie just fired me. He called the research a dead end. Joseph let out a low, sharp laugh. "Your ex-husband possesses the visionary capacity of a damp sponge. Bring the drives. I have a warehouse in San Jose. I have the hardware. We are going to build the hive." I put the car in drive and merged onto the highway, heading south towards San Jose. The setting sun cast long, golden shadows across the California landscape. The heavy weight in my chest dissolved, replaced by a sharp, electric anticipation. Joseph's warehouse sat at the end of a dusty industrial cul-de-sac. The corrugated metal exterior bore no signage. I parked my car, grabbed my briefcase, and pushed open the heavy steel door. The interior of the warehouse felt like the inside of a massive, blinking brain. Server towers lined the left wall, their cooling fans generating a constant, rhythmic breeze. Workbenches dominated the center of the concrete floor, buried under tangles of copper wire, soldering irons, microchips, and disassembled drone chassis. Joseph stood beside a massive multi-monitor workstation. He looked up as I walked in. He had grown into his features. The chaotic energy of his college years had sharpened into a focused, intense presence. He wore a fitted black t-shirt and grease-stained denim jeans. His dark hair remained unruly, and a smudge of silver solder paste marked his left cheekbone. He walked toward me, a wide, genuine smile breaking across his face. He wrapped his arms around me, pulling me into a tight hug. The scent of metal, dark roast coffee, and clean sweat surrounded him. "You look exactly the same, Buggy," he said, pulling back to look at me. "Maybe a little more dangerous." "I just got fired, Joe," I said, holding up the briefcase. "I have nothing but these drives and a very strong desire to prove the Dean of Biological Sciences completely wrong." Joseph's eyes locked onto the briefcase. "Put them on the main console. Let's see what 10 years of slicing bug brains looks like." I unlatched the case and handed him the drives. Joseph slotted them into a massive reader on his desk. His fingers flew across his mechanical keyboard, the rhythmic clacking filling the warehouse. A moment later, his 3 massive monitors flared to life. Millions of glowing blue and gold lines appeared on the screens, forming a massive, 3-dimensional web. It was the complete neural architecture of a honeybee, mapped down to the individual dendrite. Joseph leaned closer to the screen, the blue light reflecting in his dark eyes. He reached out, his fingers hovering millimeters from the glass. "It's beautiful," he whispered. "You mapped the instinctual pathways. You isolated the swarm intelligence." "The clusters in gold represent the mushroom bodies," I explained, moving to stand beside him. Our shoulders brushed. "That is the center for spatial memory and sensory integration. The blue pathways are the motor control outputs. When a bee identifies a food source, the input travels through these specific golden nodes, instantly triggering a motor response in the blue pathways. There is no processing delay. It is an immediate, hardwired action." Joseph spun his chair to face me. "Traditional processors run code linearly. They read a line, calculate, and move to the next. Even multi-core processors just do linear calculations faster. But this," he pointed at the screen, "this is spatial logic. If we build a compiler that translates this exact biological map into a digital framework, the software won't need to compute the best route or the best action. The software will simply react, mirroring the biological instinct." "Can you build a compiler that understands biological synapses?" I asked. "With these maps?" Joseph grinned. "We are going to create an entirely new computer language. We are going to teach silicon to think like chitin." The next 6 months dissolved into a relentless, intoxicating blur of creation. I moved into the small loft apartment above the warehouse floor. Joseph and I established a rhythm that defied traditional work hours. We functioned in a state of symbiotic obsession. My job involved dissecting my biological maps, breaking down the chemical and electrical transfers of the insect synapses into logical flowcharts. I translated the organic behavior of the honeybee into pure mathematical principles. I mapped the exact sequence a bee uses to calculate the angle of the sun, adjust for wind resistance, and communicate coordinates to the hive. Joseph took my mathematical principles and built the digital architecture. He wrote lines of code that looked nothing like C++ or Python. He created a language based entirely on nodes and pathways. He called the language Chitin. The transition from friends to partners happened naturally, a quiet shift in the space between the server racks. We spent our nights eating cold takeout on the concrete floor, arguing over the efficiency of neural routing protocols. I watched him solder microscopic gold threads onto prototype circuit boards, his hands steady and precise. He watched me diagram the neural feedback loops of a predatory wasp on the massive glass whiteboard. One Tuesday at 3 a.m, the heavy rain hammered against the metal roof of the warehouse. I sat on the edge of my desk, rubbing my tired eyes. Joseph stood by the central testing rig, a complex array of custom-built microchips hooked to a diagnostic monitor. "I integrated the spatial navigation algorithms from the Apis mellifera map," Joseph said, his voice raspy from lack of sleep. "I flashed the chitin code onto the new chip architecture. Run the maze simulation," I said, leaning forward. Joseph pressed the execute button. On the monitor, a digital maze appeared, consisting of thousands of intersecting paths, dead ends, and dynamic obstacles that shifted every 5 seconds. A red dot appeared at the start. In a traditional simulation, an AI would run pathfinding algorithms, calculating distance and probabilities, bumping into walls, and learning the route through trial and error. The red dot on our screen never even bothered with calculating. It shot forward. It moved with fluid, terrifying precision, anticipating the shifting walls, sliding through the changing corridors without a single hesitation. It navigated the hyper-complex maze in less than 3 seconds. "Zero latency," Joseph whispered, staring at the diagnostic readouts. "Energy consumption is practically zero. The chip has no need for thinking, Monica. It's acting on pure, programmed instinct." I stood up and walked over to him. We stared at the screen, the magnitude of what we had just accomplished hanging heavily in the damp air. We had successfully digitized biological instinct. We had created a processor that functioned with the hyper-efficiency of an insect hive. Joseph turned his head. We stood inches apart. The glow of the monitors illuminated the sharp angles of his face. He reached up, his calloused fingers gently brushing a loose strand of hair behind my ear. "You changed the world, Buggy," he murmured. I looked up into his eyes, feeling the sudden, intense acceleration of my pulse. "We changed the world, Joe." He leaned down and kissed me. The kiss mirrored the energy of the warehouse, electric, intense, and perfectly inevitable. I wrapped my arms around his neck, pulling him closer, anchoring myself to the man who had seen the absolute brilliance in my life's work. We broke apart moments later, breathless, the ambient hum of the servers vibrating in the space between us. We formed a company the next morning. We named it Synapse Tech. Joe wanted to name it Buggy Wonderland. I put an end to that quickly. The development of the hardware followed rapidly. Joseph designed physical microchips that mirrored the physical structure of the insect mushroom body. The chips utilized 3-dimensional stacking of microscopic logic gates, mimicking the dense cluster of synapses in a bee's brain. We integrated these chips into a swarm of 50 small, quad-rotor drones. We programmed the drones using the Chitin language, instilling them with the digitized flocking and foraging instincts of the Apis mellifera. 9 months after Charlie fired me, we rented a massive exhibition hall at the annual Global Tech Symposium in San Francisco. Synapse Tech remained entirely unknown. We had no marketing budget and no venture capital backing. We simply paid for a central booth and erected a massive, transparent mesh enclosure. The convention floor hummed with thousands of tech journalists, investors, and engineers. Flashy displays showcased incremental upgrades to smartphones and slightly faster processing architectures. Joseph and I stood inside our mesh enclosure. I wore a sharp black blazer and dark jeans. Joseph wore his signature dark t-shirt and a tailored jacket. 50 small black drones sat dormant on a table in the center of the enclosure. At noon, the main convention organizer announced the start of the primary demonstrations. A small crowd gathered around our booth, mostly drawn by the curious lack of promotional material. I picked up a microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, traditional computing relies on massive processing power to solve complex problems. Today, Synapse Tech will demonstrate a new paradigm. We have mapped the complete neural connectome of the honeybee and translated that biological map into a proprietary computer language. We have given silicon the gift of biological instinct." A murmur rippled through the crowd. I saw several journalists raising their cameras. "These 50 drones do not possess a central server," I continued. "They have no external Wi-Fi connection. They are not following a pre-programmed flight path. Each drone is equipped with our proprietary hive processor. They communicate with each other using localized radio frequency pulses, exactly the way a hive communicates. I will now introduce an obstacle, and you will see them react based entirely on digitized instinct." I nodded to Joseph. He flipped a single toggle switch on his tablet. The 50 drones lifted off the table simultaneously. The sound of their rotors created a low, synchronized hum, instead of hovering in neat rows. They formed a dynamic, fluid sphere in the center of the enclosure, swirling and shifting like a flock of starlings or a swarm of angry hornets. The movement was organic, complex, and mesmerizing. I stepped up to a pneumatic cannon mounted on the edge of the enclosure. I loaded a heavy rubber ball into the barrel. "I will now fire this projectile directly into the center of the swarm at 80 miles per hour, I announced. Traditional drones would require a central processor to track the object, calculate trajectories, and issue individual evasion commands, resulting in inevitable collisions. I hit the firing button. The cannon fired with a loud thump. The heavy rubber ball shot into the center of the swirling mass of drones. In a fraction of a millisecond, the entire swarm warped around the projectile. The drones closest to the ball shifted outward, communicating their movement instantly to the adjacent drones, creating a perfect, fluid tunnel for the ball to pass through. The ball struck the back of the enclosure. The swarm instantly collapsed back into its perfect, dynamic sphere. Total silence fell over the crowd. Then, the flashes started. The cameras erupted in a blinding storm of light. Shouts rang out from the journalists. The crowd surged forward, pressing against the velvet ropes. Investors scrambled for their phones. Tech bloggers began typing furiously on their laptops. We spent the next 6 hours fielding a tidal wave of questions. Engineers stared at the diagnostic readouts on Joseph's tablet, their jaws dropping as they saw the zero-latency processing speeds and the practically non-existent power draw. The hive processor was a total revolution in autonomous systems, robotics, and logistics. Within 48 hours, Synapse Tech became the most talked-about company on the planet. The major tech conglomerates initiated a massive bidding war for our proprietary Chitin language and the hive microchip architecture. Defense contractors wanted the technology for autonomous drone swarms. Logistics companies wanted it for automated warehouse navigation. Joseph and I sat in the penthouse suite of a San Francisco hotel, looking at the spreadsheet on his laptop. A massive tech conglomerate had just offered a $3 billion acquisition deal, allowing us to retain complete creative control as CEO and Chief Technology Officer. Joseph closed the laptop. He walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the city lights. I stood beside him. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small black velvet box. He opened the box. Resting on the black velvet was a ring. The band consisted of braided platinum and rose gold, intricately woven to resemble the double helix of a DNA strand. At the center sat a flawless, square-cut diamond, flanked by 2 small, brilliant-cut sapphires. "I built the band myself in the machine shop last week," Joseph said, his voice quiet and steady. "Buggy, you brought the spark to the warehouse. You gave the logic a soul. Marry me. Build the future with me." I looked at the ring, a physical manifestation of our perfect integration, biological elegance wrapped around unyielding structure. "Yes," I said, sliding the ring onto my finger. "Absolutely yes." 6 months later, Synapse Tech occupied a gleaming, state-of-the-art campus in the hills above Silicon Valley. The architecture of the main building drew inspiration from the hexagonal structure of a honeycomb. My office sat on the top floor, featuring walls of smart glass and a massive balcony overlooking the valley. I sat behind my sleek, black obsidian desk, reviewing the final schematics for our next-generation processor. The intercom on my desk chimed softly. "Miss Carpenter," my executive assistant said, "a Dr. Charlie Cadmus is here to see you in the main lobby. He does not have an appointment." A slow, deeply satisfying smile spread across my face. I tapped the intercom button. "Send him up, please." I stood and walked over to the massive glass terrarium occupying the right side of my office. Inside, a thriving colony of leafcutter ants moved continuously, carrying bright green fragments along their complex, self-constructed highways. I watched their perfect, unthinking efficiency. The heavy oak doors of my office swung open. Charlie stepped inside. The past year and a half had not been kind to the Dean of Biological Sciences. His custom suit looked slightly loose, hanging awkwardly on his frame. The arrogant posture he had displayed in my university lab had vanished, replaced by a tense, nervous energy. He gripped an expensive leather briefcase in his right hand. He stopped a few feet from my desk, looking around the massive, sunlit office, taking in the original artwork and the sleek technological displays. His eyes locked onto the ant terrarium, a subtle twitch pulling at the corner of his mouth. "Monica," Charlie said, attempting to project a sense of familiar authority, "you have done very well for yourself. This campus is impressive." "Dr. Cadmus," I replied, my tone perfectly neutral. I remained standing by the terrarium, forcing him to address me across the expanse of the room. To what do I owe the pleasure of this unscheduled visit? Charlie cleared his throat, adjusting his grip on the briefcase. I have been following the incredible success of Synapse Tech. The scientific community is entirely shocked by your application of biological connectomes to computer architecture. The hive processor is a monumental achievement. You called mapping the insect neural pathways a dead end, I reminded him, my voice smooth and lethal. You stated that counting the synapses of a fruit fly offered zero return on investment. A flush of red crept up Charlie's neck. I lacked the interdisciplinary vision at the time. The university board placed immense pressure on me to prioritize traditional pharmaceuticals. I made a short-sighted administrative decision. I am here to rectify that. He stepped forward, placing his briefcase on my desk and popping the golden latches. He pulled out a thick stack of documents bound in heavy blue cardstock. The university is prepared to offer you an endowed chair in the newly formed Department of Biocomputing, Charlie announced, tapping the documents. We are offering full tenure, a massive research budget, and complete autonomy over your staff. Furthermore, I have convinced the board to offer a highly lucrative licensing agreement to integrate Synapse Tech's hardware into our supercomputing clusters. He paused, lowering his voice, attempting to inject a note of intimacy into the sterile pitch. We made an incredible team once, Monica. We can rebuild the department together. You belong in academia. You belong back at the university. I looked down at the thick contract on my desk. The university crest sat proudly at the top of the page. It was everything I had ever wanted 10 years ago. It was the ultimate academic validation, and it was entirely worthless to me now. Charlie, I said, walking slowly back to my desk. I picked up the contract. The paper felt heavy, loaded with the weight of bureaucratic chains and institutional politics. You did not come here to offer me a job, I said, staring directly into his eyes. You came here to save your own career. The university board is furious that their Dean of Biological Sciences fired the researcher who went on to create the most valuable technological patent of the decade. They realize you handed billions of dollars of intellectual property to a private entity. You are dangling this endowed chair in a desperate attempt to bring the technology back under the university's umbrella before they terminate your contract. The blood drained from Charlie's face. He opened his mouth, but no sound emerged. The polished veneer shattered completely, revealing the panicked academic bureaucrat underneath. The office doors opened again. Joseph walked in. He wore a crisp white dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up to the elbows, carrying a metallic prototype chassis. He paused, looking at Charlie, quickly assessing the tension in the room. Joseph walked over and stood beside me. He placed the heavy metal chassis on the desk next to the university contract. Is there a problem here, Buggy? Joseph asked, his voice calm, dropping a protective hand onto my waist. Charlie stared at Joseph, his eyes darting between the two of us. He recognized the man who had translated my raw data into a silicon empire. He noticed the casual intimacy of Joseph's hand resting on my waist. Finally, Charlie's gaze dropped to my left hand, resting on the surface of the desk. The afternoon sun caught the brilliant cut of the diamond, sending sharp refractions of light dancing across the obsidian surface. The braided platinum and rose gold DNA helix band sat perfectly on my finger. Charlie physically recoiled, taking a heavy step backward. The reality of the situation crashed down on him. I had not just taken my research, I had built an empire with a man who truly understood its value. No problem, Joe, I said, keeping my eyes locked on my ex-husband. I slid the university contract across the smooth surface of the desk, pushing it toward Charlie. Doctor, Cadmus was just leaving. We have a wedding to plan, a new processor to launch, and an entire world to restructure. I don't have the time or the inclination to save a dying university department. I placed both of my hands on the desk and leaned forward. Take your paperwork, Charlie. The door is behind you. Charlie grabbed the contract. He fumbled the papers, shoving them roughly into his briefcase. He turned and walked out of the office, his footsteps heavy and defeated, the glass doors sealing shut behind him. I turned my head and looked up at Joseph. He smiled, leaning down to press a soft kiss against my temple. You handled that with absolute, hardwired precision, Joseph murmured. I simply reacted, I replied, turning my attention back to the blueprints of the next generation microchip spread across my monitor. It's pure instinct. The end.
If you enjoyed this quick escape, hit the subscribe button for new stories twice a week. Until then, I'll see you at the next flip of the pages.